How's it going, everyone? Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be covering speed up your testing with headless browsers. We'll do a quick intro of the presenters today. My name is Nick Brown. I'm a marketing manager here at SmartBear, specifically focused on cross-browser testing. And I'll let my co-host John do a quick intro as well.
And I am John Reese. I'm a senior backend developer here at SmartBear, working exclusively on cross-browser testing. And I have a little something that we've been working on that I'd like to show you.
Thanks, John. And just some quick housekeeping items. So SmartBear tools are synonymous with quality across the entire SDLC, from planning and design to testing and monitoring. We were founded in 2009 in Boston, Massachusetts, and have grown to over 11 global offices encompassing North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Over 6 million developers, testers, and operations professionals from 20,000 plus companies like Google, RBC, and Vineyard Vines use our tools every day to deliver bug-free software. Our company of over 500 employees also provides 3 open source initiatives, including 2 wildly popular open source tools, Swagger and SoapUI. As you can see here, our portfolio spans across 6 different categories: Plan with HipTest and Swagger Hub, Create with Swagger V Pro, Collaborator, and Test Left, Test with SoapUI Pro, LoadUI Pro, Test Complete, Load Ninja, Cross-Browser Testing, and Bitbar. Deploy, we partner here with popular solutions like ASW and Docker. Monitor with AlertSite, and finally manage and analyze with Zephyr. But for today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on cross-browser testing. And here I'll hand it off to John.
All right, thank you for that intro, Nick. So the purpose of this webinar is to show you guys what we've been working on as far as adding a new platform to our Selenium system, a headless platform that should allow you to run more tests and run your tests faster. So the purpose of this webinar is to get you acquainted with what it means to have a headless browser and how it differs from a normal browser. We'll talk about why you might want to run your Selenium tests on a headless browser. Then we'll talk about how to do it with our system, and then we're going to run through a live demonstration of setting up an existing Selenium project that I have on my machine that is currently running on non-headless browsers, and change it to run against headless browsers instead. And then we'll round this out with a Q&A after everything is said and done.
And John, I'm just going to add in here, for the Q&A session, please direct all questions to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to all your questions at the very end, but if not, we'll be sure to follow up with you.
Very important. Thanks, Nick. All right, so what is a headless browser? A headless browser is really just a normal web browser. The only difference being that it's not drawn on screen, so there's nothing actually being rendered that you can interact with. The only way to interact with headless browsers is by using automation tools, and Selenium is one of those. And because it doesn't have to be fully rendered, these headless browsers tend to be a little bit faster than their non-headless counterparts. But other than that, it should allow you to reproduce all of the same bugs that you might encounter in the non-headless version, and your app should perform exactly the same as it does in a non-headless browser. Some of the benefits for developers who are writing these tests are that the headless instances are faster, and when your tests are faster, it allows you to test earlier, to test more often, and to get feedback from those tests sooner. The headless instances that we offer run on Chrome and Firefox. So while you can't run all of your cross-browser compatibility tests against headless browsers, by targeting Chrome and Firefox, you can cover about 80% of the total global market share for browser usage. So you can get a really good idea about whether your site is working or not just by running against these headless browsers. You should think about running your tests against a headless browser whenever rapid feedback is a priority. So if you're running component tests, sanity checks, smoke tests, anything that you want to be able to run often and get feedback for quickly, you should think about running it against a headless browser. You'll spend less time waiting, more time actually writing your test. And like I said before, just by targeting Chrome and Firefox, you can get a lot of confidence about how most of your users are going to interact with your website. Specifically, the way we have implemented headless testing is we allow any user with at least a 5 parallel plan to run twice as many headless tests as their plan allows for non-headless tests. So a 5 parallel plan can run 10 parallel tests against headless browsers in addition to the 5 parallel they get on non-headless browsers. In addition to the higher concurrency, the tests themselves execute about 30% faster, and that has to do with the nature of being headless. So down at the bottom of this slide, we have some metrics to give you an idea of what this performance increase would really mean. So say you had 100 tests, and each test takes about 6 minutes to execute against a non-headless browser, and you're on a 10 parallel package, that would take a total of 1 hour to execute all of those tests. But if you ran the same tests against headless instances at that higher parallel count, each test would only take 4.6 minutes to execute, and it would only take 23 minutes to run the full suite of 100 tests. So that's a lot of time saved, and if you're trying to get that feedback quickly, that really does make a big difference. All right, and so now I'm going to show you guys how to take an existing Selenium setup that is currently running on Chrome on Windows and change it so that it's running on headless Chrome. So I'm going to get out of my slideshow. I'm going to find my editor here. All right, I'm going to start off just by walking you guys through what I have here in my test suite. So I'm using Node.js for this, but you can do the same thing with any language binding that you're writing your Selenium tests in. We can glance inside my package.js and see that my only dependencies here are Mocha, which is the actual test framework itself. I have a plugin for it called Mocha Parallel Tests, which is going to allow us to run these tests across multiple browsers at the same time. And I'm using the stock Selenium WebDriver, the official Selenium bindings. And it says it's 4.0.0 Alpha 5, but if you install it with NPM, this is the version that you get. So it might say alpha, but it's stable enough for that to be what they're installing for users requesting Selenium WebDriver. So that's my package setup. I have all of my tests in this test folder here. All of these files that end with spec.js are my actual test cases. These are what's all going to be actually running. And they all utilize a function from inside of this test helper file, which this function is going to get called in each test case right before it starts. So this is where we are actually creating our remote WebDriver instance so that we can use it in our tests. So I'm going to make a little tweak here. I had been running it against Headless last. So if you're familiar with Selenium, then this should look somewhat familiar to you. We have a capabilities object up here with the options that we want to set for our Selenium WebDriver. So we're passing record video true, just so that we can have an artifact after our test runs to be able to see it. We are setting, to begin with, we're setting the platform to Windows, just so we can see that run on Windows and get something to compare it against. And then down here, when we actually create our WebDriver instance, our remote WebDriver, we're using our email and our auth token, and we are pointing at our normal Selenium hub. So if you're already running tests with Selenium, this URL should look familiar to you. This is the URL of our normal Selenium hub. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of this editor, and I'm going to run that test. So you'll notice that I'm using the Mocha Parallel Tests plugin for Mocha, and it allows me to specify how many I want to run in parallel. So for this example, I'm running on Windows. I'm going to assume that I have a 10 parallel package. So I'm going to limit my concurrency here to just 10 parallel tests. And I'm running this with time. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell us once all these tests have finished, how long it took all of them to execute. So I have 20 test cases here, and I'm going to run them 10 at a time. I'm going to go ahead and send this. And if I can get my browser up, I should be able to log in, and we'll be able to see those tests as they run. So here you should be able to see in my Chrome instance all of the tests that I have currently running. It looks like the first batch of 10 all finished, and so a second batch of 10 got sent. Back over in my terminal, we can see how they're running. We're getting a lot of passes, which is very good. I'm just going to let this finish running, and then we can tweak it and run the same tests against Headless. All right, we had one straggler in there that was taking a little second to start. I went ahead and just killed it so that it wouldn't throw our numbers off too much, because I want to keep this comparison realistic. So at the end of all of those tests, we can see here from this last line that it printed that it took a total of 1 minute and 49 seconds. I'm going to save that off so we have it for later. And then I'm going to go in and show you guys what it takes to change your test to run against these headless instances. So I'm going to go back into that test helper file, which is where we set up our remote WebDriver. I'm going to change the platform where we had been specifying Windows. I'm going to comment that line out and uncomment this line. So now our specified platform is headless. And the only other change I have to make is down here, instead of running against hub.crossbrowsertesting.com, we're running against hub-cloud.crossbrowsertesting.com. So just those two changes. You need to specify Headless as your platform. Oops. And you need to make sure your command executor is pointing at hubcloud.crossbrowsertesting.com. So just those two small changes. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to run the same suite of tests again, but this time I'm going to double how many I'm running in parallel, because for headless instances you get to run twice as many in parallel. So I'm going to send that. And then I'm going to go back to my Chrome browser. We can see that all 20 tests got sent and they're all running. And because of how we manage our headless instances, you actually can see them, which is nice for debugging purposes. And the tests are already finished. It took a total of just under 38 seconds. So if I can do a little bit of math here really quick, that is about 110 seconds for that first test and 37 for the second. That's a speed up of almost 3 times. 2.9 times faster running that same suite of tests against headless instances compared to the Windows-based batch from before. And that is all it takes. So what we're hoping is that we start seeing our users taking advantage of these headless instances and spending less time waiting for their tests and more time actually developing their applications and getting results. And with all that said, I think it is time to move back on to the Q&A portion.
Thanks,
so if
John.
you have any questions, make sure to put them in the meeting Q&A channel.
All right. Thanks, John. And that was great. It was very efficient, very fast, and definitely proved out to be about 3 times faster, which is amazing. Cool. So before we kick off the Q&A session, I was going to launch 2 quick polls. So if you don't mind answering this first one, and as we go through this poll, we'll start to answer some questions. And if more questions come about, feel free to throw them in there. But if for some reason we aren't able to get them in the time that we have, we'll be sure to follow up with you. And John, do you want to start off with a few of these questions?
Sure thing. I see a question here from Matthew Early that says, can you run headless with native apps and Appium using headless devices? Is there such a thing, or is it purely for browsers? And that's a very interesting question. There actually is currently in development a sort of headless Android way to run Appium tests. It's something that we're kind of looking at and looking into, but it's not on a roadmap just yet. It is something that might be offered in the future, though, and that people are working on. Moving on to the next question from Emeka Annie Anwu. The question was, do we have provisions for weights in the script we need to run in the headless browser? I think this is a question about setting weights, like WebDriver weights and implicit weights in your test. And what I have to say is, since the headless instances are also running Selenium, any existing Selenium command should work exactly the same with these headless instances. Eric asked to see the code again, so I have code up on screen right here. On the left, you can see the test helper, which is the kind of the helper class that actually sets up the remote WebDriver instance. And on the right, I have one of my test specs, where you can see I'm importing that test helper library and using it in my before statement right here. How does this framework compare to Cypress? Cypress is a wholly different framework from Selenium. It is designed to run locally on your machine. There's no way to run it against a cloud provider's platform, for example, which means that you have to maintain the browsers on your own computer to run your tests against. Cypress is not cross-platform. Our headless instances right now support Chrome and Firefox, and Cypress is Chrome only for now. Once you dig into it, there are a lot more differences between Cypress and Selenium, but I think that's for another webinar. Peter asks, what about the AI features in Test Complete? And I'd love to talk about that more, but it's unfortunately not where my area of expertise is. I believe we do have some Test Complete documentation, and that's where I'd recommend you you start looking for details on the AI features.
Hey, John, before we get to the next one, I'm just going to launch one last poll for folks that are looking for some help on how they can get started with headless browsers on cross-browser testing. I'm just going to launch this poll just to see if you'd like to be followed up with.
Great. And as they answer that, I think I'm going to get a few more questions in here. Brian asks about the general recommendations for integration with Rails and RSpec. I think RSpec is a fantastic testing framework. There are lots of guides out there on the internet about how to get started with Selenium and RSpec. My recommendation would be to just start playing with small examples and work your way up. That's really the best way to get into using Selenium to test your website, is just find somewhere and start. An anonymous attendee asks, can we run Headless in Incognito mode? And the answer is yes. Using your Selenium capabilities, you can send arguments or preferences for Chrome to be launched with. And one of those settings that you can set at the very start of your test is to be in Incognito mode. Sarita Rawat asks, do you see any behavior changes from headless to non-headless mode? Like, in order to run tests close to customer behavior, should we still use the actual browser versus headless? In my testing, I have not yet seen an instance where the headless browsers perform or render any differently from their desktop counterparts. But that being said, there are sometimes platform-specific issues. So for your final round of tests, it's not a bad idea to still have some tests that run against these non-headless instances, two browsers running on Mac OS and Chrome, or Mac OS and Windows, sorry, just to make sure that the experience is the same. But that's more of just kind of trying to play it safe, because I haven't yet seen any times where they differ. Matthew Early asked a kind of a related question about a time when he has seen the headless instances behave differently from the non-headless counterparts. He had an instance where a pop-up was not trapped when they ran without headless. I might try to contact you after this, Matthew, and get more info about that. I'd like to be able to reproduce that and play with it. I'm very curious to see any times where these platforms don't line up. Let's see, some of these other questions. Samitha Heber asks, how can these be run in a CI/CD pipeline using Docker? And again, you can run these tests in just about any way you run your existing Selenium tests. You only need to make 2 tweaks to your test suite to be able to run against Headless, and that's to change the platform in your capabilities to Headless, and to change your command executor, the actual hub, Selenium hub URL, to hubcloud.crossbrowsertesting.com.
Hey, John, why don't we pick 2 more, and if we aren't able to get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you after this presentation.
Okay, sounds good to me. An anonymous attendee asks, can we pass multiple browsers at the same time? And you absolutely can. I only showed this example running on Google Chrome, and that's because of how my Mocha tests were set up. They were all just using Chrome. But you just have to change the browser that you're requesting when you start your test, and you'll be able to run across, say, Chrome and Firefox at the same time. Let's see. One last question. Vikas N asked how the application response time compares between headless and regular browsers. And from what I've seen, the response time is about the same. The speed with which the browser loads resources, like if you're looking at a HAR capture or a network recording, the actual application performance seems about the same, but they are faster when it comes to executing Selenium commands. So if you're trying to profile some application performance issues with your Selenium tests, in my experience, Headless is a pretty good analog for a non-headless browser for performance testing.
Perfect. Thanks, John. I really appreciate the presentation you've put together today, highlighting the power of headless testing and be able to run your Selenium tests 3 times faster than a normal or a non-headless browser. I just want to thank everyone that attended today's webinar. And if you do have any questions that come about after this presentation, you can reach out to myself at nicholas.brown@smartbear.com. And I'll be sure to get any kind of answer, maybe from John or another member of the automation team for cross-browser testing, but we'll be sure to get back to you. And once again, thank you and have a great day.